Good afternoon, all. Welcome to October's Network Tech Talk. It's so great seeing everyone this afternoon. For those of you who have not attended in the past, Central Maine Network Tech Talk is a monthly event where founders and leaders share advice on how they overcame challenges, capitalized on their target markets, and developed their product, providing you with actionable insight for your own products and processes. For more information, you can find us on Facebook or online at centralmaine.org under our Tech Night tab. I'd like to thank our sponsors for this afternoon's conversation. This free event is presented by Central Maine Growth Council and is sponsored by CGI, Valley Beverage, Thomas College's Harold Alfond Institute for Business Innovation, and Bricks Co-working and Innovation Space. In addition, I'd like to say hello to folks watching remotely at home or from their office. This Tech Talk is being streamed live and will be available for later viewing on our YouTube channel. This afternoon's Tech Talk is presented by Chimani, guiding your national park adventures. In this Network Tech Talk, Kerry will discuss how Chimani is navigating the great outdoors with GPS-enabled maps, curated content, and information on more than 400 national parks, wildlife refuges, and forests to get you going in the right direction no matter where you go. For those not familiar with Chimani, Chimani is a Yarmouth, Maine-based software company that makes free iOS and Android travel apps for enjoying the outdoors and exploring and touring America's national parks. And without further ado, I will hand it off to Kerry Gallivan. Kerry, thank you for joining us.
Great. Thanks, Sabrina. It's great to be here. All right, great. So as I was saying, I'll talk a bit about Chimani and give you some insight in terms of what we do and some of the core kind of elements of the company. But then I'm just going to spend a fair amount of time just kind of talking about what it's like to build a consumer mobile app company. And a lot of kind of overarching kind of themes, but then also tying it down to my experience with Chimani and just sort of how we've evolved relative to the mobile app industry over the last 11 years. And then at the end, I'll leave plenty of time for Q&A, so don't worry about asking questions or during the presentation. We'll have plenty of time for that. All right, so I can go ahead and keep on pressing my keyboard to go to the next slide. So that worked perfectly. So great. So once again, Kerry Gallivan from Chimani. When I started Chimani, it was really about providing really good user content for people who are visiting national parks. Because back then it was 2010, and people I knew that mobile apps were going to be a part of that whole visitor experience, and just knew that the government really wasn't going to provide much of a way in terms of technology for quite some time. Over time, it's really kind of evolved to this kind of broader problem which now exists really in the marketplace. So you find people are predominantly just relying on really the two core apps to go to a lot of these outdoor destinations, whether it be a national park or even just local state parks. They're using Google Maps and they're using Apple Maps. And while these are great apps to basically get people to these destinations, they really begin to fall apart when it comes down to actually experiencing these outdoor opportunities, whether the places or the different activities go along with that. And so that our basic premise that we work on is that the whole outdoor discovery is ultimately broken. And that's what we're looking to fix. And coupled with that, you'll also see this increasing problem around the quality of content. More people are using these predominant apps, but at the same time, there remains real quality control issues around outdoor experience. And this is largely driven by the fact that these two apps are largely about just auto-based navigation. And they're really not about outdoor-based experiences. And lastly, you'll see that there's just a very little content when it comes to these apps, and that many times people are simply relying on a Google Maps when they go up to Acadia, for example, and how it's just lacking in really important content related to that experience. So this is the core problem that we're focusing on. So, when we talk about the outdoor industry, I mean, early on, a lot of people really didn't sort of encapsulate it as really a large industry. And that was a lot of conversations that I've had with people. But I think, the pandemic and one of the positive things that's coming out of this experience is, in many ways, people's reconnection with the outdoors. And this is where we've seen it surge. There are already these numbers that I talk about, the large market numbers, and then the amount of participation in the US. These have only grown. So the nice thing about that working in this sector is that the outdoor industry is finally kind of being recognized as a large market. And it was largely because there weren't a lot of economic numbers related to that backing it up. So between the pandemic and then coupled with some recent reports that have been coming out on a regular basis, you now look at the outdoor industry and the outdoor market as quite a significant market. So in essence, kind of the solution that we're presenting is providing curated mobile app guides specific to outdoor recreation and travel. Now, I'll talk a bit more about what I mean by curated, but really what we're doing is, when I started Chimani, I was heavily influenced by my experiences traveling overseas and working overseas, and I always had a Lonely Planet guide with me. And I always believed that travel guide type of experience was always important and the best way to going about visiting places. And so I've always sort of modeled that. And then with the emergence of mobile apps and mobile technology, that ultimately is the platform. So we really have always been and continue to be a mobile first company. So the emphasis is always on the mobile experience and people using these tools in experience. We're anticipating the majority of the time these apps are going to be used in these parks and these places. So it really is about that real world experiences and using that. And so that really informs a lot of how we kind of design the app. So this is a screenshot. This is the current app that you see in the App Store. So if you were to go to either the Apple App Store or Google Play and you download it, this is what you'll see. So this is a design that literally has been in the store largely for 11 years this April. It's been modified slightly over time. But what out of this experience of having sort of really focused on this mobile app for 11 years now, there's been 3 core functions that have really evolved to be really the core experiences. And this is important to kind of keep in mind if you have any inklings of kind of wanting to develop a mobile app. Ultimately, what you need to do is not add a whole bunch of features, but really figure out what are the succinct features that really have an impact and what your users are looking for. Because, unlike designing for a website where you've got much more screen real estate and so on and so forth, the mobile app experience is a very unique one. So our kind of core feature that really kind of came out of somewhat of a surprise was we build in a gamification of the outdoor experience. It's sort of like a Pokemon Go like experience where when you're actually at these physical destinations, you're able to check in within the app and you unlock both points as well as special badges. And those badges signify that you have been there because you can only unlock specific badges by being physically at these places. And so there's a little back-end logic that we use with the GPS to sort of make this happen. But this is proven to be probably one of the most valuable features of the app. And really, I think a lot of it comes down to what we're doing is we're helping people capture and record these wonderful memories. And that's always been part of this experience. It's just making sure people get the best possible experience out of going to these amazing places. You can go ahead and press the slide one more. And so that kind of comes to like really where we get going. And it started was developing these guides. And really sort of, once again, it's as if you were walking into, back when there was a Barnes and Nobles or a Borders bookstore and you would browse the travel section and you pull off a Lonely Planet guide or a Frommer's guide to Yosemite or Yellowstone. Once again, I wanted to take that research, sort of professional written approach, but have it make sure that it worked. It was intended to be always within a mobile app because I always believed that was the best way to provide an experience going to new destinations. So that's really become and continues to be a core component and feature of the mobile app and Chimani. And go ahead and press the next one. And then lastly, I always knew that there would be data problems. So my background before doing this was I had a lot of work in Africa and Southeast Asia working on technology projects where there really wasn't a lot of connectivity. So I was always sort of data and connectivity aware. And fast forward, even though we're post.com and mobile apps were starting to come about, there are still data pockets and connectivity pockets, and national parks still to this day struggle to try and increase bandwidth. But in a lot of ways, it's sort of in opposition with the primary goal of a lot of these places is the preservation of the natural lands. So the app always had to work offline, not just the maps, but as well as the content as well. So that was always a core tenet and remains to this day to really kind of be the focus of what we're doing. So we kind of circling back, once again, these are the three primary functions which people are using our apps for, which really sort of have been evolved and sort of baked in over the 11 years. And then lastly, this is sort of our last kind of product category. So this is sort of a nuanced product. So we've been fortunate to have a relationship with Subaru for a number of years. It initially started on the advertising side, and then about 2 or 3 years ago, it actually evolved so that we built a custom version of our mobile app to be running directly within the car itself. So this, some of you might be familiar with CarPlay or Android Auto. This is a completely separate system and a custom app that runs on Subaru's operating system, which is called Starlink. And so this was exciting for us, partly because I think in many ways, this whole infotainment category within cars is an emerging market. And I think in a lot of ways, it's like what smartphones were back in 2008, where people still had flip phones. There are more smartphones coming out, more and more people were transitioning over. And I think the overall car experience is really changing for a lot of people as new models are released and people start to interact with their car more. And so we anticipate they're going to use their car similar to the smartphone, which is why we're excited to be in this marketplace. So real kind of brief, just to kind of like, once again, who your market is and who your customers are always an important aspect of building a company and really trying to figure that out. And so we've been fortunate, once again, over 11 years now, we've been able to really clearly identify who are our target markets. We always affectionately called them windshield tourists. And these are really just casual consumers of the outdoors. They're baby boomers, they're families, they're young professional couples. And generally, when you look at the data, they don't go more than a mile away from the trailhead. They're very much tethered to their car when they're going about these experiences. And they usually have, in some cases, they have kids with them. They're not necessarily backpacking or even camping. They're generally staying in hotels. And so this really is our core market for us. And that really defines a lot of what we do as a result of that. So once again, kind of as we sort of evolved, this concept of capturing memories really resonated and really has kind of become a cornerstone of what we do. And as from a product perspective, it's become really interesting because we've got a lot of personal data that we now are holding, and a lot of these are personal memories that are on our platform. So that's a way in which we've maintained our engagement with these people. They don't just use our app once, but then they actually keep on using it as they go to more parks and add to these previous experiences. And then the other thing that's really, what I've learned over the years is that initially, I thought, oh, well, this technology was really the value that was being created. But increasingly, it became clear that it was actually the content was in some cases even more valuable than the technology, especially as the ease of creating mobile apps, started to increase, and then the cost barrier related to that started to come down. But in the end of the day, our content started to get very rich because you generally had an approach of sort of social crowd-based content generation. So when you have a large data set of curated content, as you add to that, that becomes increasingly more value, which is why now, we started as a national park focus, and now it's really expanding to all federal and state public lands, and sort of really sort of broaden and capture a much more broad, because in many ways, we feel it mirrors that experience that customers have. In many cases, they don't necessarily distinguish between a state park or a national forest or a national park. They just want to get outside at someplace beautiful. And then sort of lastly, the way that we make our money is that, so it's a freemium / subscription type model. You can download the app completely free. All of the gamification you can do for free. And you can get access to basic information related to all the parks. Now, when you have intent on going to a specific destination, that's when you're more interested in the guides that we offer. And that's actually where you get the paywall. And so it's a subscription-based paywall. By paying $29.99 for an annual subscription, it unlocks all of the guides that we have. So right now we've got about 65 different national guides, heavily focused on national parks, but we've started to move into the state recreational guides, a lot like Delorme and the Gazetteers type approach. And then you also unlock that offline map model. And then we offer real world discounts with different providers related to these destinations. So super simple model. Once we figured it out, and I'll talk a little bit more about that process, it worked, but it's taken a lot to figure this out. So, all right, so now, I'm just gonna kind of move on to just kind of talk a little bit more broadly about what it's like, creating a mobile app company with an emphasis on consumer, because that's really sort of my emphasis and my expertise. So, sort of the first question, if you're thinking about doing a mobile app, you really kind of have to ask, does it already exist? I mean, this is sort of the basic question in creating any sort of company, but, with the mobile app space, it's in some ways more important. But if it does, I think in many ways, that shouldn't necessarily prevent you from actually going forward, because in many cases, you may actually be in a position to feel like you can build something better. And there's perfect opportunity to go after a market and try and do something better. We see it over and over again happening. So, while there are literally millions, I think, of mobile apps out there, I still am so bullish on, mobile apps as, a driver for economic growth, as well as just kind of company growth in general. All right. So, this is kind of like an evolution of Chimani in sort of both the problem, issue, and sort of the evolution of where we're going. So back in 2010, like I said, there were no mobile apps for national park guides. So that was kind of the fundamental problem that I was addressing. There wasn't a product out there. And so I went ahead and I built it. But then you sort of fast forward 5 years into it, the mobile app boom kind of starts to happen. And there's a whole heck of a lot of different mobile apps out there. And, a lot of lousy ones, some good ones. And then you start to get around 2018 and you start to see a lot of zombie apps happening. And so now you're at a point where the early mobile app boom happened, but you either didn't figure out the business model, or you basically were doing it yourself, and you just didn't want to keep up to date on all the changes, and you realize how expensive it is to maintain mobile apps. And so that's where you start to see a lot of zombie apps out there. And even this isn't necessarily specific to the outdoor industry, but industries, all sorts of categories within the App Store. There's just lots of zombie apps that exist. And then sort of in our own sort of world, sort of this past year, the National Park Service finally launches a mobile app. It's taken them 11 years or 10 years to do it. So we had anticipated this was going to happen. So that has forced us to sort of change our general strategy away from just national park related guides, and then to sort of broaden it. And it's timely for us, because one of the biggest problems the Park Service is having, and the parks are having right now, is an overcrowding issue. And so our mission going forward is really to try and help address that issue of really showing people that there are a lot of amazing places that you're driving right by when you go up to Bar Harbor in Acadia. And there are plenty of opportunities to try and explore the outdoors. But in many cases, once again, it comes back to that fundamental problem we feel that exists, which is the discovery of these outdoor destinations. And that's not so obvious. So right now, we're sort of perfect alignment sort of with this evolution of this sort of how things played out. So then, these days you have to kind of figure out, from the start, you got to have some sense of how you're going to make money going into the mobile app space. It's fortunate in that a lot of these, it's been proven, and there are some clear categories out there. But to kind of give you a sense of how difficult it's been, this was fun sort of making this slide. So literally, I think I'm up to 8 different business models since starting Chimani, and I'm sure there are probably things within there that might have slipped in at some point in time. A lot of this kind of reflects the evolution of the mobile app space in general, where now you sort of have this, essentially it boils down to, if you kind of fast forward to the 2018 slide, we're predominantly a subscription consumer mobile app. The content licensing and advertising is kind of unique to us, but if you're going to do a mobile app these days, it kind of breaks down into 3 different categories. You're either going to be a utility-based app that someone downloads for a very specific task, And those still can charge a pay per download, like 99 cents or $3.99. Or you're going to be more in the gaming category where you have some type of in-app transaction for virtual goods or virtual currencies. And you're still a freemium model, but you really sort of drive your revenue through those in-app transactions. And then lastly, the subscription category like we're in has really become accepted by consumers for the large part. We haven't really seen a large fatigue on that. It seems like that's here to stay. And you see large companies like Apple, for example, starting to get more and more into the subscription market. And so that finally is sort of a matured business model for mobile apps. And so if you were ever to go out and look for investors, you were starting a mobile app, it's a much clearer picture for them because everyone's kind of figured out, okay, you can be a Headspace or you can be a Calm, which is subscription based, and they kind of have a sense of what your costs are and what you need to do to grow. So, but this is just a fun slide to show you how it's just evolved over time. So then you kind of ask, how am I going to get this built? I mean, there's a range of different technologies. They all boil down to pretty much iOS, Apple, or Android, Google. But then I throw in web just to kind of, I'll talk more about that in a second, but you got to build it. There are plenty of people who've talked about creating an app, but until you actually build it and launch something, all it is just vaporware. So, it's kind of stepping back once again, how do you get this done? Really, I put on the top of the list sort of learn how to code. This is something that I wish I had done 2020 hindsight, 11 years ago when I was trying to, I had this concept and I wanted to get it done. I was fortunate in that I had come from a technical background. I've worked with a lot of engineers. So I was on the cusp of, do I learn how to do this or not? In the end of the day, you should, I can't advocate enough learning how to code yourself. I mean, Apple's releasing curriculum geared for elementary students on how to code. There are so many new tools and so many resources out there to learn how to code, and the tools have just become so remarkable. So I can't help but emphasize that. But if if you're just not of that vein or you don't have that time, then you got to go out and find a technical co-founder. And obviously this is sort of in many ways, if you're thinking at all about building a large company and thinking about taking outside investment, this is key because generally people don't want to invest in an individual, they want to invest in a team. And if you don't have the technical skill sets, then they're obviously going to be looking for that. And then you can just do things a lot quicker as opposed to one person. But then you can also, if you have this basic concept and you want to just pay someone to get it done, you can certainly find engineers. The challenge there is that, in the US, these engineers are in high demand and they're very expensive. So you ultimately are starting to look overseas, and that presents its own challenges. Sometimes there's language challenges, and if you're not experienced with the technology, then those language challenges become even more pronounced if you don't have a clear understanding of the technology and what you want to get it done with that. But that's certainly a resource for folks to use, and a much more viable one as the marketplace has evolved. And then there's now this new category called no-code platforms. So these are essentially websites where you create the apps and then the back-end service will do the submission, and then you're able to basically manage it through a web interface. Much like kind of creating a website, these platforms have now come into an existence. And there's one company that I work with, this is the whole model. They went from concept to launched product and trying to build a business on a no-code platform. So it's certainly viable. Now, the challenges with this is that if you do any customization, you run into real roadblocks. And especially also if you think about if you want to get outside funding from investors, they don't want to invest in a company that's dependent on another platform and limitations. So there are challenges. In the end of the day, when people, when I talk to folks or different people working on different mobile apps, inevitably, if you're just trying to build the concept and you're trying to make it work, really what I encourage people to do is look at a more mobile responsive type of implementation. This is just basically a website that works really well on a mobile device. It saves a lot of time and you can quickly put something together, and that allows you to not only prove the concept from a customer perspective, but then also begin to test the business model. Native implementations of mobile apps are expensive, they're costly, and you just want to try and get as quickly as possible to getting to that proof of concept with your minimum viable product and just seeing if people will pay for it. So in many cases, responsive web is really the best place for that. And then sort of, I love this kind of notion of, yeah, if you build it, they will not come. Hands down, okay? You can put an app on the App Store and you'll get maybe 1 or 2 downloads and it'll be your family members. There are so many apps out there that, even from the very start of the process, if you were at all thinking about getting into this, you really need to think of how am I going to rise above the clouds at all and really sort of differentiate myself because it's so difficult to compete right now in trying to get exposure. What works really well is if you have some sort of niche product or some type of niche market, then you maybe are able to sort of, there's an opportunity there to rise above the clouds. And I think that's really something where we've benefited from a lot, is that we were very nichey from the very start. So, this is sort of examples of what sort of worked best for Chimani over the years. So oddly enough, paper marketing. So these were these brochures that you see at tourism visitor centers. Because we were working on physical sort of destinations and they're about the guides to national parks, this worked really well early on. It was just to sort of like have all these brochures distributed all throughout California and all throughout New England. And people converted. They took up the brochure and they downloaded the app. The problem back then was that there wasn't a clear business model. So while we got a download, we weren't necessarily converting them into a paid lasting user. The other thing is like earned media has been tremendous. Once again, it comes back to if you can work within a niche market, you've got greater potential to really sort of have this category go. Our biggest successes have been just reporters that have picked up a story and, they're just, influences in themselves. But right now, every time there's an article written about a new Subaru model, inevitably they mention the Chimani app. And so for the last 3 years, when the new models come out, we're getting free press with each one of these reviews that are written about the car because they add that. So that's just a great example of how this earned media really becomes very effective over time. Now influencers. So, we haven't effectively really necessarily used influencers well, but now you're in this sort of interesting time period where in the mobile world, because of the changes Apple is making on their privacy policies, that's now impacting Facebook and advertisers' ability to effectively target people. So right now, paid advertising is sort of a bit of a, it's a restart in many ways because it's not effective and not as clear in terms of your conversions and what you're paying for. So now there's a big emphasis on influencers, whether it be TikTok or Instagram, this is now, as things get worked out on the sort of paid advertising front, this is now sort of a growing category. And not your sort of like million followers, there are nice sweet spots around, someone that might have 10,000 followers or somewhere around that category. There are tremendous opportunities to work with them at this point. And then lastly, sort of, you got to build a great product because in the end of the day, I like to think that, and I'm pretty sure, but I don't have any real data behind it. But, right now, Chimani has grown the most because of word of mouth. It's people recommending your product to other people. And I think, it's not specific to the mobile app world, it's anything. This in the end of the day comes back to, can you build a great product that meets a very specific need? So we come back to those core fundamental sort of components of just building any sort of company. But this is really how things begin to kind of go quote unquote viral. And then lastly, kind of that tip, like don't even touch paid marketing. You think, oh, I'm going to grow this by spending $5,000 on Facebook ads. If you don't have a clear business model and you haven't figured out the product, then you're just going to basically blow that money and it's going to be a waste. Also, now it's becoming increasingly difficult because of this privacy battle that exists between Apple and Facebook right now. So your ability to target people and really accurately see what the cost is now decreased as a result of this whole fight that's going on between them. So great. I'm going to talk kind of like, all right, how do you make your money back? If you're a mobile app company. So, there's a lot of kind of this debate between, is it high growth? And yeah, sure, there are plenty of companies. I read about a company this morning out in San Francisco. They got $10 million seed round to develop a mobile app. And they got it from like probably the best VC in probably the world. But that founder, had a multi-million-dollar acquisition, lived in Silicon Valley. Sure, there are those potentials, But the reality is that most people who are working on a mobile app are probably kind of fall more in the lifestyle category. And that's cool. I've like, I think it's like the best thing since sliced bread to just kind of like build a company and really kind of allow itself to grow. And, the benefit now is that with the mobile app company, really it's the market has become established. So you truly can almost look at it as, well, this is an opportunity to grow a small business that has global reach, because really that's the market that you have, which lends itself to, this is a great opportunity for Maine in general. Now, you can be based in Maine, but ultimately our market in many ways is more California than it is Maine, so you still can have that global reach. So, like beyond that, if you do want to kind of, move on and say you've been able to, successfully grow the company to any sort of level, there are plenty of people out there and companies out there that look to just buy mobile apps. And if you hit certain revenue milestones, then you will sort of be attractive for them to sort of purchase you. And either you continue to work on the app or you just sell it completely. And this then becomes, they basically streamline the whole app, and they may have other apps in different categories, but there are numerous companies out there that basically are acquiring all these mobile apps. So that's certainly an opportunity. And then lastly, there are plenty of opportunities, far more realistic than like these crazy high growth type of approach. It's just a strategic acquisition. So if you're in a niche market, you may have a specific function that is very attractive. And if you've demonstrated growth, then there's certainly an opportunity to be acquired. And then there could just be alignment given just competitors or other folks that are in a similar niche market. But in general, this seems to be how the way, if you can keep it going and you can keep alive and not become a zombie app, this seems to kind of be the basic breakdown in terms of how you can actually ultimately get your money back or go off into the sunset. So with that, we'll go to the sunset slide. All right, so yeah, that's basically an overview, and I think this would be a good time to kind of switch to any Q&A if people have or not. So.
Great, that was excellent. Thank you so much. I have a quick question for you. I was very intrigued. When you talked about your marketing, you seemed to really drill down on your customer, and you knew they were the sort of the windshield drivers. I was wondering, did you use the content that you were seeing to drive or to be strategic in who you were targeting? Did you use content to I guess learn or make some inferences?
Yeah, so I think so the discovery of those customers, we were very fortunate in that we just looked at a lot of the demographic research that had been done on visitors to national parks. So I have to say, like, market kind of data was out there. And when we knew going into it that, we weren't going to be writing about backpacking for 4 days in Yosemite, but we were talking about the family that kind of shows up for that weekend adventure, that certainly steered what's both in sort of the narrative of how the content's written, and then also what exactly we write. We used to joke early on, it's just, second to this whole gamification, the most popular feature was where all the restrooms were. And so once again, that sort of lends itself to, we knew the customer. We wanted to make sure that the restroom locations were front and center with any park guide. So does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. I was just also curious, did you examine the content when you saw the content? Did you look at that? Did you utilize that to make decisions on strategic direction for the company?
Yeah, so a lot of it was, once again, with the gamification, that gave insight into really where people were using and going. So there was that added level to look at the content that was being created and to kind of steer the direction in terms of like what new guides we would create. And then also sort of understanding like, we have guides for Banff in Canada as well as Lake District in the UK. That was an experiment to sort of expand internationally because we knew we had a lot of Canadian users that were using our app, particularly for Acadia. There are a lot of Quebecois coming down, but then also knowing that particularly on the East Coast, we had a lot of people coming from the UK. And so once we understood the dynamics around the international market, that drove this sort of experiment into these international parks as well.
Awesome. Thank you.
Kerry, you touched on this evolution, and I think you even mentioned this boom in particularly mobile park apps and this growing space in itself. Given that evolution, where do we see this market going? And what are kind of the future innovations that we may see or like to see in this space?
Yeah, well, I think, the Park Service has now a very viable mobile app. It's sort of like the equivalent of those black brochures that you would get at the park entrances. They've kind of been able to kind of move it to that next level. I think they will still be constrained in terms of kind of building too much innovation. I think the whole gamification aspect of what we do, that has always resonated, and that has just continued to be ripe for interest and kind of developing further. And I think Pokemon Go is testament to that. Still, it's millions of dollars of revenue, each year still after the big heyday. But people really resonate with sort of blending that physical and virtual worlds together. And I think that's why these capturing memories are really effective. I think the other overarching theme is that these parks are just being completely overrun. The Park Service will try and put constraints on physical movement and kind of try and manage the crowds. But in the end of the day, I don't think there's really any going back in terms of that issue. And so that's actually where there's a huge emphasis in this market on how can you begin to really move the crowds to other locations. And I think there's a tremendous opportunity, like for example, in Maine, you've got Katahdin Woods and Waters, that trying to get some of the traffic that goes to Acadia up to Katahdin Woods and Waters, but not just that, trying to get to some of the state parks and even some of the nature preserves that so many people that go to Acadia, they get in the car, they go to Portland, they drive up 95, they go to Bar Harbor, they take Route 1 back, they go to Camden, and then they go home. They're driving by tremendous places all along that way, but they just never stop to kind of discover them. So I think that discovery and working with the dispersion of these crowds is really another key theme going forward.
Great, thank you. I guess I'll jump in again. Apologies to take up the air here. I just downloaded your app. It looks fabulous, has incredible reviews. And it seems supremely vast, but beautifully simple. And I'm just curious, what does an onboard process look like to add a new park on the back end for you and your team? What kind of lift is that? Is there GIS or geographical information systems engineering going there, or is it more a multi-query and layers of base and shape files are being created on top? What does that look for adding a new location to the app?
Yeah, so we could have a whole other conversation about the whole evolution of maps. So the long and short of it, just as quick responses. So our base data is using OpenStreetMap. So if you don't know about it, it's the Wikipedia of mapping. So that is crowdsourced data, and still to this day, it's the best non-road related data set. And so if you're talking about trail information, that's going to be the best data set. And so now that has matured so that we use a third-party product called Mapbox that provides that interface and allows us to style and sort of give a better look and feel to our maps. So that once we did that took care of the mapping issue significantly. From you sort of adding a new guide, right now our focus is less so on individual national parks and more so on these state guides. So we've been working on quite a number of them as we roll up for the next version. And, it kind of boils down to, as part of this product, there is this content management system that we built. And so we don't really kind of talk about that, but these days, if you have any sort of dynamic app, you're really going to have to work with a content management system on some level, whether you build it or once again, there are plenty of companies out there that are providing these tools now. So really it's about, working with writers, working with data entry people, and then sort of the last end is sort of the editors to really sort of do an assembly. There's an editorial direction, which has been pretty well established in terms of what we're looking for content. That's handed off to the writer. The writer then has their task and they do the research and they produce the written content. And then the writer circles back around, reviews it, And then we hand it off to the data entry, which is not only inputting the pure text, but they're actually having to geolocate every single one of those pieces of content. So that requires then looking for the coordinates and doing that. And then the sort of the finishing touches are then assigning images to a lot of these. A lot of it is sort of, that's where we do go to the Creative Commons world to do that. But in the end of the day, a lot of the photos that you see within the app are photos that we've either worked with sort of semi-pro photographers to basically cull those. And so once again, sort of create more of a curated approach. And then integration to the actual physical app itself. It's pretty simple in terms of like how it's injected. And then it's just the standard process that we do within the Apple. So it's a well-oiled machine that's been worked out over years.
That's great. Thank you. Great process.
Kerry, thank you for such an incredible presentation. Something that I've seen that's really impressive is your growth since the inception of the app. What have been some of your partners or some organizations that you've worked with that have helped you realize the vision and to help you get to where you are today?
Yeah, I think we were very fortunate early on. We were able to develop a great relationship directly with Google. Because we were doing something very unique and there weren't many national park apps, everyone loves national parks for the most part. So, it's a good story. So there was an early technology called app indexing that Google was experimenting with some of their mobile apps. So that turned into a great partnership that once again created some excellent earned media as a result of that partnership, and then also Google's own promotion. So that was wonderful. And then, as we've gotten to know Apple more, having a direct relationship with their developer relations has been really important. And still to this day, having Apple's ear is really important working in this space. If you have issues or just at a general sort of what are they looking for, because the more they like it, the more they'll promote the iOS version as well. So you really kind of have to, if you're working in the mobile app space, really kind of have to figure out ways to work with both of those players. And then, we just got really fortunate with Subaru. Early on, it was their ad agency that approached us. And they saw the product and they wanted to work with us. That was in advertising. But as a result of that partnership, then the company corporate came back around and wanted to work with us on this special implementation of the app. So we've been super fortunate to have that relationship. And then we're doing something similar. We're doing some content licensing for working with Ford now. So not even necessarily working within the cars themselves. So, this opening up the auto industry, has created opportunities for other companies as well. So that's been just really key. And then sort of there's a relatively small niche of these outdoorsy developers out there at this point in time, whether it be the folks at All Trails or if you've hiked the AT, got hook guides, there's a nice community and just everyone sort of moving along and sort of bouncing issues off of one another. That support network has been tremendous over the years as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Kerry, can you talk a little bit about your team?
Sure.
And I'd also love to know where everybody's located. How big are you now? That sort of thing.
Yeah, still super small, sort of still gone completely remote. I don't think there's any need to kind of go back to a physical office really at this point. So engineering, so I spent much of the pandemic actually teaching myself how to code. I by no means sort of claim to be a coder, but I can hold my weight in sort of iOS tools right now and some of the more current tools. So I've taken a much more integrated approach. So traditionally I've kind of done product and kind of like, now it's actually more embedded with working with the engineers. And so the engineers that I work with, the Android and the iOS engineers, they're actually based in the UK. And so that's a team that I've worked with. And, this is a case where, it took a while to sort of get to that point, but now we're once again a well-oiled machine. We can work very effectively remotely. And so it's a great model of how working remotely and then also working with folks from different backgrounds has really worked out very well for us. And then, from a writing perspective, we generally kind of have a pool of about 15 different writers that we draw from, just depending on what their geographic expertise is. And then sort of the lead writer slash editor is actually based in Germany. She's originally from Washington State, but so happens to be based in Germany. So that's where all of the bulk of our content is kind of being driven from. And then, we've always worked on the data entry side with folks from the Philippines. So there's a woman from the Philippines that I've worked with for years, and she takes care of all of the data entry side of things for us. So it's a very small team, very focused. We sort of grow on the content side when needed. From an engineering perspective, we added more resources, but more contractor based to do the implementation of the Subaru app. But then it's sort of, we've got a core team of iOS and Android developers that we work with. And then graphics design, sort of once again, ironically, this a woman who's based in Croatia who does much of the graphic design for us as well. So, once again, you can be anywhere these days, but.
Well, that's great. Thank you.
Kerry, I'm curious with regards to the perspective of thinking about state parks now becoming almost hyper local due to your tech. Even noticed Chimani's got a site in Winslow at Fort Halifax Park. Can you touch on, you have a feature related to kind of trip planning and how that might help communities monetize and support eco-based tourism more broadly for a community or an urban locale, when maybe many people are thinking about this as like, a national park many miles away, and how that really could integrate broader benefit both for Chimani, but for a community. So what's your perspective on that blend of planning a trip and getting more local, if you will?
Yeah. I mean, and we've always said that sort of buzzword of hyper local. It was always kind of popped up over the time period because I'm a huge advocate for nature preserves and land trust and the land that exists. And a lot of people actually, especially if you come from like the West Coast or something, they're not as well known. So you come to a place like Maine and there's tremendous opportunities to really kind of look at some of these places. Working with sort of a focused sort of partnership at the government level. Unfortunately, I've worked with like the feds a lot, and some of these chambers of commerce at a lot of the local communities. That I realize that maybe it isn't the best fit. It just, things move so quickly, and when you start doing things like, oh, we want to do a gamification and we want to do a quest and want to take these points of interest, a lot of that kind of like quickly is like, whoa, slow down. That I'm kind of, I shy away from any sort of partnerships per se in communities. But the basic fact is that, like one of the things that we're proud about with regards to the Maine guide that we kind of quietly released last year was I wanted to make sure that, every public coastal access site along the entire coast of Maine was listed in the app, because I have this sort of fundamental I spent my summers in Wells, and I absolutely hate what happened at Moody Beach in terms of the ruling around private beaches. And so I have a personal passion to make sure that people can access the coastline of Maine. And so that's an opportunity for people, once again, to just sort of have it be a resource that isn't a book, or you don't have to go to a website, but to still maintain this access. So that's not a direct partnership or relationship, but it's a way in which I feel like I want to bring it down to a hyper-local level to really, once again, sort of address this larger theme of the national parks are getting overcrowded. There are amazing places elsewhere. Go elsewhere.
Just to interesting point to underscore, how much has that main ethos of conservation, land-based and water-based conservation flowed through the organization, particularly as many folks probably don't realize, dealing with private property rights, public rights, those rights of incipient dedication, and just the goal of growing legal public access to our great outdoor spaces. How helpful at all has that kind of main ethos flown through the company?
I think, everything that we do is informed by what we see. How does it work in Maine? Like anything from the content when we're doing the guide. I think it's important to sort of look at this content, not just from like a backpacking hiking perspective, but the scenic byways and even some of the multi-use trails that you have the ATVs on as well, because that's part of Maine culture. It's not just about going for a hike. So that has influenced it. But like I said in the earlier, like for so much of like our market is like more like California. I mean, just because you've got the numbers out there. And then when you start looking at all the parks and like, how during the summertime, the California flows into, Utah and Arizona and Nevada. So, while on one hand, sort of the main dialogue we like to, obviously be a part of and have a conversation with. And I think Maine is always a leader when it comes to conservation in many ways. When you talk about sheer numbers of potential customers, you kind of have to look west or look south. It's like we're looking at, we look at Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, New York. Those are all the folks that are coming up to Acadia, from a New England perspective. But so much of our business is happening out west. So that's kind of like more where our eyes are from a potential customer acquisition perspective.
Great, thank you. All right, just pausing for a moment. Maybe lastly, unless there isn't any other questions, where do you see yourself within the next kind of 5 to 10 years? And if there is an exit and you feel comfortable discussing it, what does that look like? But just more broadly, what's the future?
Yeah, well, I think, we're excited about this intersection around the crowding of the parks and trying to get people elsewhere. So like we're on the verge of launching a brand new design of the app, the logo, the new rebranding. So I think that's really where we want to play a role in, is really helping people discover places other than the top 10 most visited national parks. And that's where we're spending a lot of time developing these statewide guides. And building those out. So this new launch I think we'll have probably like 7 of the largest states covered when we go live with it. And so that guide model, I think we've figured out the paywall works for us. And the other thing we're excited about, the design that you've seen, well, albeit it's nice and it's worked very well, there are certain elements of it that doesn't really lend itself to the business model and then sort of content discovery we think we can improve, and especially that whole gamification. So it's a completely new design that we'll be launching that we're really excited about as well. And then, I mentioned it before, but I'm so bullish on this whole car market and infotainment, and we've got some things that are going on there that I think are really interesting, especially as sort of like, Tesla was sort of the Apple of the world. Once people kind of experience a really phenomenal interface with the car, everyone's sort of trying to mimic that. And so I think that that's a real exciting area. What happens to Chimani, who knows, it's like, I mean, if I were to guess, then it's probably more apt to be like a strategic acquisition if I'm lucky, but I don't know, after 11 years, I just keep on, next week is a new week and I just keep on going forward.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That was really spectacular. Just pausing for any additional questions.
Garvin, Peter, how are you?
Hey, Peter.
Yeah, I did have a few. Sorry, this is a fascinating conversation for me. And I joined a little bit late, about halfway through, and I've been trying to take calls. I'm trying to multitask today because I'm busy, but Kerry, this is fascinating. I'm super enthusiastic about this. Kerry, I work with the SBDC as a business advisor. I specialize in outdoor brands and branding and things of that nature. I come from the outdoor side of retail, so this is fascinating to me. So, and you might have covered this already, but I had a question. Where does your app fit versus things like All Trails and these other things? Or I'm just trying to get context because I missed some of the presentation.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I didn't really touch upon like the competitive landscape, but a lot of people these days, they're using All Trails when you're wanting to go for a hike. The kind of the challenges with All Trails is just there's just a lot of trail information in there. And the way that they evolved is it was from a strictly crowdsourced model. And so, the content that they've now kind of locked down, and they sort of claim it's curated, but it really isn't curated in the sense it's just crowdsourced content. So you have a lot of errors there, and the discovery of kind of like what are the trails that are really, there's still a challenge with that. At the same token, they're strictly going after the hiker market. they're really going after that. Whereas our guides, we sort of pivot more, as I mentioned, like we're going to have restaurants for a destination there. We don't have it at the state level, but we're going at things like natural wonders. We're including all the scenic byways. We're also including a lot of emphasis on a lot of the historical markers or historical sites that are around. So it's something more of a general travel experience, recognizing that our customers really don't go more than a mile away from the trailhead, and they're very much tethered to their car. So that's really our big differentiating factor between the all trails of the world and what we sort of bring to the market.
Perfect. Thank you. That helps me out a lot. By the way, I just went to the website. I'm just trying to look through the features there are phenomenal, like bathrooms, right? I'm like, that's a huge deal. And I went, that's such a huge value add because I hike with a lot of different people, and specifically we have a women's group that goes out, and I hike a ton. I hike every day somewhere because I live in Maine, right? And that's a huge feature, right? Like we need to know where that's at. Right? Not everybody likes to do that. So just from what I saw, it looks very like there's a lot of value add to this, to just me getting it, because now I can find out the things like the ranger tours. I was looking at the Acadia version right now just to see something local that I knew a little bit better, and then it had a it was in the top right, and it said, hey, seal pupping season is coming on. Like it had things like that I thought were super valuable, right? Hey, seal pupping is coming on at this season, and it was a timeline that, and so it gave super local information and go, hey, don't hike around the seals. Like to me, that was a huge value add, right? You're not going to get that from a Trails app. Per se.
Right. And I think, that is an opportunity where I think like the Park Service, the public-private potential of working together is improving, because they finally now have a public API where you can actually tap into some of those time-sensitive alerts. And they now are encouraging folks like us to integrate into the apps. And so that's really where it becomes a really powerful tool, but especially when, we're looking at some of the national forests out west, and even some of the national parks, and tapping into some of the fire alerts, which is obviously a huge issue. And just making sure that, you're getting that information out to as many people as possible, but in particular, those places that are heavily overcrowded and have a lot of people during the summertime, when you're more apt to have these types of things happening. So.
Hey, and flow's a huge, in terms of the crowding, that's a huge conversation here. Is that also a conversation on the West Coast, specifically California?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, Zion is sort of the poster child for it right now. I mean, if Zion can figure it out, then I think, but with all of the big parks, I mean, you saw time-based permitted ticketing happening across pretty much all the parks last summer. So.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yep.
All right. Just pausing for a moment. Okay. Sabrina, you want to take us away?
Absolutely. Kerry, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon and giving us insight into all of the incredible parks that we have around the United States. I know I'm definitely motivated to get out and see what I can learn from Chimani and how to share it with all my friends. So thank you so much.
Great. Thank you. It was a pleasure being here. Thanks.
Thank you to our audience for joining us this afternoon. This Tech Talk has been recorded and will be available for later viewing on our YouTube channel. Next month, CMGC will be featuring CEO Brian Rayhill of CourseStorm, a cloud-based class registration and marketing solution that is making education more accessible, on Thursday, November 18th at noon. For more information on upcoming network Tech Talks, please visit our website at centralmaine.org and click on our Tech Night tab. Thank you for joining us, and have a great rest of your week.